there seems to be genuine fear around the transition because Donald Trump was asked, of course, would he abide by the result essentially? He wouldn't say yes. It's almost unprecedented, isn't it?
Look, I mean, there's a lot of commentary about this. Firstly, we've just got to let this play out. My guess is that this plays out in a much more uneventful way than people are thinking. I have a faith in the American democracy and the way it will operate, and so my suspicion is that this will be an election which is respected. But I mean,
even in a very close result, mail-in ballots, the scepticism already mentioned by Donald Trump, you've got a lot of faith.
Well, I do have a lot of faith in the American democracy, and I've read some quite apocalyptic kind of commentary about possibilities. I mean, firstly, who knows what's going to happen? So we need to just see that. But I do have faith that the American system will handle this in its stride.
And do you think the world will breathe a bit of a sigh of relief if Donald Trump does lose?
Look, from Australia's point of view, and this is the point that we really need to focus on, Australia is not at issue in this election. Like, the relationship between America and Australia is not at issue. A re-elected Donald Trump will still be an administration which sees the alliance with Australia as very important. And an elected Biden administration will see the same thing. So that's fantastic from an Australian point of view. And that's from the perspective of Australian politicians, that's really as far as we should take it. The alliance is critically important to our national interest. It's central to our strategic policy. It's central to our national security. And under a re-elected President Trump or a newly elected President Biden, that will remain the case.
And let other countries and concerns around Europe, NATO, whatever it might be, let them worry about themselves.
Well, we will have issues that we raise within the context of the alliance, whoever is the president. It's really important. I think that we are advocating to the United States around seeing an economic strategy in East Asia, and given that they are not participating in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now, that's clearly in Australia's national interest. That's going to be as much a matter of advocacy to a Democratic administration as it would be to a re-elected Trump administration. So we'll have our issues, right. But the important point here to understand is, from an American perspective, their relationship with Australia is not at issue in this election. Both sides greatly support it, and that's a wonderful place for our country to be.
We have two major unions pushing Labor to be unified on gas as a transition fuel. Why do you think they need to say that, or they feel the need to say that?
Well, they're representing their membership, obviously, in briefing members of the Labor caucus. But the points that they were making were eminently sensible and I think are very consistent with the place that we're at. We understand completely that gas is a fundamentally important industry for this country, and we support it. Labor supports the gas industry.
So just on that, though, there's clearly been some tension between Mark Butler and Joel Fitzgibbon on the extent of support, for example, for gas, talk about targets as well, but gas seems to be the central debate right now. Has that been settled?
I think it's settled. I think what you see is a resources minister or shadow minister who's speaking in respect of resources, which is what you would expect, and the minister responsible for climate change and the promotion of renewable energy doing the same there. But here's where both Mark and Joel agree, and indeed there is agreement across the caucus. We support the Australian gas industry. I mean, Australia is the largest gas exporter in the world. Of course we support the gas industry. We understand how important the role it is in electricity generation. I mean, for some states, like Western Australia, it's the majority of electricity generation. And it's a critical feedstock in relation to very significant manufacturing in this country, including in my electorate in Geelong. We won't have a petrochemical industry in Australia without gas being a critical feedstock to it. And we won't be able to recycle plastics in this country, which is an important environmental outcome, without having that industry in place. So gas matters.
Yeah, there are some indisputable uses, but there's been more debate around how much it might be used as a transition. It's still a fossil fuel. As I said, there was clearly disagreement between Mark Butler and Joel Fitzgibbon. My understanding is that's been settled now.
It is settled. And everything I've just articulated is a view that is held by Mark Butler and held by Joel Fitzgibbon. We also want to see net zero emissions by 2050. We want to see an increase in the renewable sector in this country. But it is possible to be both, and that is what we are.
But just on that, so there is no longer, there has been some sort of settled position between those two. There's no longer disagreement.
The position between Mark and Joel and between them and across the caucus is settled, and it's settled on the terms that I've just articulated.
Is it? And how does it land in terms of being settled and gas use? Is it along the lines of the government's gas-led recovery? Does Labor say, yep, we'll give that a big tick?
Well, I mean, the gas strategy that's been put forward by the government is all well and good, but it's a fair way into the future, if we're being honest. Like, there are a whole lot of issues around gas which present themselves right now that need to be focused upon. Like, I've got manufacturers in my electorate who absolutely want to see more gas come online, but that's a few years down the track. They've got a much more immediate issue as to whether or not, when they're renewing their existing gas contracts, they're going to be able to do it on terms which enable them to continue to manufacture. And that means we've got to see some form of reservation on the East Coast. We support that. And so you know, it's fine, but it's not the whole story. And there needs to be a much more here and now present policy from the government, which we're not seeing.
Is that going to be easier for Labor to now to come at this? Again, just finally on the Fitzgibbon-Butler question, that there was recognition something needed to be settled. There was clearly tension there, right?
Well, I think what we were seeing was a shadow resources minister speaking in respect of resources, which is what you would expect that person to do, and a shadow climate minister speaking in relation to...
Right, but normally they do that. They don't do that with contrasting views. They had that, they no longer do. But you have to sort of recognise the problem to say we've solved it.
Yeah, and we have a settled, clear position, which I've just articulated. We want to see net zero emissions by 2050. Right. That actually should... I assume that is the policy of the government, although they never say it. And the reason why I assume it is because it's a consequence of being a party to the Paris Accord, which our nation is. So that's what we
the only
want
point there is that the Paris Agreement could theoretically have Australia with some emissions, other countries with negative. But
that's a commitment to zero net emissions is the fundamental outcome.
Well, it's an overall goal in the
the
second half of the century.
And at the same time, we support...
I just want to get quickly on inflation. So it's back up to 1.6%. It's still well below the RBA target band and seems driven by mainly petrol and childcare. So, I mean, costs necessarily aren't going up that high in households at the moment.
Well, we are obviously concerned with the increase in childcare costs, and that's why, you know, we were announcing the policy that we did during the budget reply.
It came off a base of zero for a lot of people.
Sure, but it's still a situation where, for many families, childcare remains inaccessible and unaffordable, in the sense that there comes a point in time where to go back and do more days a week actually ends up not being financially viable for a given family. You know, we want to make sure that childcare, as an example, is accessible in a way which increases participation within the workforce, which by and large is women, and that's a critical thing. But I just say, like, it is obviously it's great news in what we're seeing in Victoria. I think there is hope that we are seeing the economy opening up again, and we do want to have hope for the economy going forward. But this is a moment for the country to actually have some vision about an Australia which is better in the future than it was going into coronavirus. You know, I think we need to change our cultural relationship to science, for example, so that we are climbing the technological ladder and making it much more a feature of our economy going forward. Childcare is a critical reform. What you get from Labor here is vision about what the economy should be going forward. What you get from the government is a whole lot of spending of money with very little to show for it.
Richard Marles, appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.